Yeah. Hello, everybody. We will reach today the last topic, but first of all, I again invite you to the talk of Mr. Gallach about interest rate and monetary policy today. So if you have time, please join us at 12:15 in S123. Yeah, the last time we have talked also about the dependence between interest rates and exchange rates, and we derived the so-called uncovered interest rate parity, and this is derived just from the classical opportunity cost argument that we have two investment alternatives: investment at home in the Eurozone and investment in the United States. And then investing €1, given the interest rate in the Eurozone, then we obtain, of course, €1 times 1 plus the interest rate. If we want to invest the €1 in the United States, then at first we have to exchange the euros into US dollars via the today's interest rate. Then we can invest in the United States times the interest rate factor in the United States. And now we want to make both investments comparable. So we need to have the same unit. So we don't know what is the exchange rate in 1 year. So we have in our calculation to change back via the expected exchange rate between US dollar and a euro. And then if we assume fully competitive markets, and what is also important, that we are risk neutral if we compare investments at home and abroad. And well, nowadays in general, we say for capital markets, this is given, especially for the developed economies. But if you think now what happens in the world and what happens especially in the United States, we don't know what the government will do in the future. If it is still a risk neutral investment in the United States, maybe in future we have to make there a question mark. But if this is the case, then we can derive from this the so-called no arbitrage condition, so that in equilibrium, both investments have to have the same value. Because if one investment would be more profitable, then of course everybody would walk to this investment. So this would then mean the demand for this investment is increased, so the yield of this investment will fall, and it will then fall until we have the equation between the two investment opportunities. So please be careful. This is not a law. This is derived from these conditions. And for example, if we would be not risk neutral between the two investments, then, for example, we had to add at one side a risk premium. Well, and the nice little thing, which we have from this model is that we can solve this for the expected exchange rate, and then the expected exchange rate, so a not known today number, is directly depending on three today known numbers, the exchange rate today and the both interest rates in the United States and in the euro. So in the end, this model then can be used in order to forecast the expected exchange rate. So this can be then interpreted as the market expectations of the exchange rate. And then last week I said, well, ex post, there is it mostly possible that we are better than this forecast with another model, but unfortunately we cannot derive always the model ex ante, which we have to use, because of course then we would beat the market, which is assuming a fully competitive market, which is a quite still, I have to say, to admit, still a quite good assumption for the international capital markets and the currency markets. So ex ante, we don't know which model will be better in the future compared to this one. So somehow as a benchmark, this is then the naive forecast. Yeah, and the last topic within this is then the so-called purchasing power parity, so that we in general can derive from a very general concept, which is comparable how we are measuring the value of money as we have done it in macroeconomics via the CPI, via the consumer price index, so that we translate this concept of an individual representative consumer consuming over a year a representative basket of goods. Then we can calculate with the prices the value of this basket in one country, and we can take the same basket in another country, walking there into the supermarket, taking also then the prices valued in the other currency, adding all up, and then we have the value of this representative consumer basket in both countries, valued with the two different currencies. And then this is called the purchasing power parity. We just take the relation between the two values, and then this ratio is interpreted as the purchasing power parity. So also somehow an exchange rate between these two currencies. So this is the value of the representative basket in the United States, and this is the value of the representative basket in, let's say, Germany. or the Eurozone. Well, and then the relation between these two values, this can then be interpreted as, so to speak, the economic exchange rate between these two currencies. But of course, this exchange rate can and in general will deviate from the exchange rate which we find at the market. Well, and why? But it deviates in general from the market exchange rates. Well, and one of the main reasons why this in that general is only a theoretical concept is, of course, that many goods cannot be traded directly, or this will be more important, more and more important, since we are rising the trade barriers right now. So the harder it is that we can trade the goods and that we, change prices due to tariffs and other trade barriers, then of course this concept has also uh, a problem. And quite often, we can say that many tradable goods are not perfect substitutes. Also, that we have different preferences. What is a representative basket? Maybe we can say that these baskets are quite similar in the United States and in Europe. But for example, if you go to Africa or Southeast Asia or to China, then in general, the preferences of these societies differ from the preferences in Europe or the United States. And then you have to use different consumer baskets. And this, of course, then complicates also this concept of purchasing power parity. But on the other hand, this concept of purchasing power parity can somehow give you a long-term direction where you maybe then find, due to the economic development of a country, the exchange rate in the future. So because of this, the purchasing power parity cannot be used for quotation marks good medium term forecasts of the exchange rate, but it can give in general a long term direction of the movement of exchange rates. Well, and maybe then you can look up purchasing power parities. You find, for example, at the IMF database, or maybe you find also some other source, because I gave you not Eurozone countries to analyze. So maybe you can um, look up the purchasing power parity and then compare this to your actual exchange rate, and there you have maybe also nice outcomes using IMF data mapper. You know this from the macro course, to look up for your country the PPP and compare this with the market exchange rate. Yeah, and then the last one is that some guys from The Economist, they invented maybe a quite easy way to have a proxy for this purchasing power parity, and the funny name is called the Big Mac index. I think I said it last week that unfortunately the data is not free anymore, so I had to just take a snapshot of the screen of the current data. So these guys, or then it is used for measuring the value of our consumer basket just by using only one good. And well, why is this Big Mac actually really famous? Well, behind this is the reasonable idea that this good, the preferences for this good are very similar all over the world. And it is a good. Remember, I said one problem is that some goods are not really tradable. And here we have a good which is in the end just produced in the same way in almost all countries in the world, at least within the large cities. Well, and then it is quite easy. You just can walk in, see what the Big Mac costs within your country in your currency, and then you compare this to the costs of the Big Mac in another country, or then in general comparing this to the still world currency, the US dollar, and then you can derive just from comparing the price of the Big Mac if you can say that in general your currency is undervalued or overvalued with respect to the US dollar. And then you see here the most overvalued due to this Big Mac index currency. And this is maybe also not very surprising. We have talked in a more specific way about Switzerland, that they still are something like a safe haven for the international capital markets. So still they have large inflows to the to the to Switzerland, and this means that we have really an upgrading of the Swiss currency. I think I had also here the development relative, yeah, here to the euro, and then you see we are coming at the start of the euro from 1.6, and we are now almost by half of it, 0.9. This means that within 25 years, the Swiss franc relative to the euro has appreciated by almost 100%. So everything is twice as expensive as before. And even what we find with the Big Mac index, that we have this huge overvaluation of the Swiss franc. So if you click at the first link, you can read a little bit about this Big Mac index. And since the data is not free anymore, I had to use here another database where I unfortunately cannot download the data, and therefore I used this screenshot. Yeah, and here you also see Eurozone, so Germany, 15% overvaluation. And on the other side, we have the most undervalued regions, and this is especially here in Southeast Asia. And here, maybe on this, there you also see that this concept, this very simple concept using only one good, that it reasonably works. Well, I have explained that the overvaluation, especially of the Swiss franc, you should see if this is a relevant concept. And also we have a huge undervaluation of China. And this we also know. Here I said to you where we had it. Yeah, that China more or less coupled their exchange rate on the US dollar, and therefore the development of the Chinese currency and the US dollar versus to the euro is very similar, and that the policy of China, since this is not a free economy, we call this a steered economy or a steered market economy. So within China, you have market processes, but especially with trade to abroad, then we have many, many interventions by the government. And that one intervention is that they use their undervaluation of their currency compared to the world market, especially relative to the US dollar, to be more competitive for their export goods. And this undervaluation we see, for example, here. So, then maybe have a look for your country, and also you can have a look for your country for the Big Mac index. So then maybe you can compare the IMF data you find for purchasing power parity and the Big Mac index data. So also look up the Big Mac index for your country. So, okay, and then we will talk a little bit more tomorrow about this, since we are now anymore only 4 persons. In this case, I think then we can just do the talks you have to do just within our lecture times, maybe. So this will be then in the last week of May. Let's see. I think then here 27, 28, we will have the talks. Yeah, question to you maybe. Uh, is it possible for you to do it in presence? Okay, great. Because this will be then a little bit easier. Thank you. Okay, so then, as I said before, we will come to the last topic of this lecture, because of course a good theory of international trade, the implications of this theory, we have to find in the real trade of the countries with each other. And until now, we have in general used the concept that international trade arises from the fact that countries are different and that in general there is a comparative advantage in producing a good relative to another country. This meant that we fully specialize within the Ricardian model and within the specific factor model. We have the same argument, but we have not anymore only one production factor. We have a neoclassical production function, and this meant then that the transformation curve had this right-banded curvature, and this then meant that we still, if we open our markets for the world, are specializing, but that we are not fully specialized anymore. But in the end, international trade arises from the fact that we are exchanging different goods. So one country is exporting A and the other country is exporting B and imports vice versa. Well, but then if we look into the data, what do we found? What we are also exchanging? This may be a question for you. What kind of goods? Do we exchange only different goods, or can you maybe find some other examples where we are exchanging similar goods? You have an idea. If you are talking, I cannot hear you. I don't know if the loudspeaker setup is okay. Oh, it should work. So what kind of car are you driving, or your parents, or your friend? Okay. And do you have friends which are driving other cars? And maybe you know what I mean, why I'm asking this. Chinese cars, I think, well, if we are cycling to the Adivisa port, then we see many, many Chinese cars there, but this just starts. What other cars we find, especially in Germany? Well, Chinese cars are now coming, especially for e-mobility, because the distance they can drive is longer and the price is lower. Was, I have to admit, I say right now was for the so-called old cars, who was or still in this case is the yeah, the strongest competitor of the German car industry. Who is still the largest car manufacturing company in the world? Just guess. Ford is quite large, but I think Ford is around number number three or number four. So VW is the second largest. Ford maybe then comes, or General Motors, I don't know. But then who is the largest? But Ford is also a good example then, because a medium-sized Ford, compare this to a medium-sized VW. What kind of goods these two cars then? Are these really different goods? Not really, yeah. So with the United States using Ford and VW, there we are exchanging similar goods. And the largest car manufacturing company, this is in Japan, this is Toyota. And yeah, maybe also, or maybe even German cars and Japanese cars are even more comparable to each other. And also, if you go to the pharmaceutical sector, producing medicine, these are also very similar goods we are exchanging there. Also in the chemical industry, washing machines, we are producing still some in Germany and abroad, and they are also quite similar. So also in electronics. And we have to admit, at least roughly two-thirds of the international trade is not exchanging different goods with each other, but exchanging similar goods. And so we have an explanation for exchanging the classical trade theory, different goods, but we have until now not a good explanation why we are also and even more exchanging similar goods. Well, and this is still then called the new trade theory. Well, this new trade theory is also already 50 years old. It was developed in the beginning of the 1970s, and then some famous papers were written also in the beginning of the 80s. And I think I mentioned him also in my macro course, Paul Krugman, one of the most influential economists during the last decades. Yeah, he was one of the main guys who has developed this theory, and I think in 2008 he obtained the Nobel Prize. And yeah, well, and what they relaxed in the assumptions for international trade was this main assumption, which we always had, a linear production function in the Ricardian model, and also then the constant returns to scale assumption for the neoclassical production function, where we have more. So the linear function has constant returns to scale since there's only one production function. If we have more production factors, input factors, then this was the assumption that we simultaneously double or triple all input factors, and that this then means we are doubling also the output. And now we are relaxing this assumption because now we assume that it is also possible that we have increasing returns to scale. So with only one input factor, this meant doubling labor input means doubling output. So this is constant returns to scale. And if we have the situation that we are doubling the input and the output is tripled, these are increasing returns oops, to scale. Well, and in order to be here, yeah, correct, this means if we have lambda and lambda is larger than 0 times L, this means output is scaling also with lambda. And here, if we are increasing L with lambda, then this means we are increasing output, not with lambda, but lambda to the power of alpha with alpha is larger than 1. And in order to be complete, it is also unfortunately possible that we have decreasing returns to scale. And in this case, we would have lambda hoch alpha to the power of alpha with 0 smaller alpha smaller than 1. So, and here in general, you have the power to 1. So this we also call the alpha is the degree of homogeneity. Do you have or homogeneous function of degree alpha? So this is not that complicated. Homogeneous functions of degree alpha. Oops. Have you talked about homogeneous functions, especially in mathematics and microeconomics? There, you should have heard about this. Okay, great. And also then this is that you remember this homothetic references if alpha equals to 1. So a homogeneous utility function of uh, degree alpha. This is also called a homothetic. There, then you have to be a little bit more general than you know, because you know hopefully that utility functions can just be transformed by a monotonic transformation, and then they still represent the same utility. Okay, so and now we relax this constant returns to scale assumption, and we assume especially that there could be also increasing returns to scale. Well, I think I said when I have talked about constant returns to scale within the specific factors model and monopolistic, not monopolistic, and we come to that, and the Ricardian model, that we are using this constant returns to scale assumption, which at a first step is maybe somehow a little bit surprising, because for a single company, we always look for situations to create increasing returns to scale. A good manager would make some decisions that he finds a situation where we can say, well, still the same input with more output, or the other way around, the same output now with less input. This especially in the innovation process. But maybe you remember, or hopefully you remember, why did we have made the assumption of constant returns to scale? Why are we using very, very often this assumption? Yes, great. So this fully competitive markets. Well, and there you see, then it is not that easy just to relax this assumption then, because here, not fully competitive markets anymore. Or we have to argue that in competitive markets, we, in the actual situation, can argue that we, although we have competitive markets, that it is still possible to have these increasing returns to scale. And I made also already this this example within a competitive innovation process. Then we always seek for production possibilities, which then over time have increasing returns to scale. But of course, we have to see that in general, we are leaving now this assumption here. Okay, so maybe as a little recapitulation, Of course, if we are looking at a production with increasing, decreasing, and constant returns to scale, this we can translate into the slope of the cost function. And then, of course, very important, since if we are still, and this is of course still our assumption, a profit maximizer, that then we are also interested into the development of the marginal costs. So again, assume we have only one input factor. Then this would mean, remember the Ricardian model, we have a linear production function. We have also linear cost function. Then in this case, because it's just the inverse. And of course, if we have a linear cost function, the first derivative is then a constant. So we have a horizontal marginal cost function. If we have our neoclassical production function, then this would mean we have a convex cost function, and this would then translate also in an increasing marginal cost function. And now we are in the nice situation, increasing returns to scale. So a convex production function, this translating is translated into the concave cost function. And this, of course, the slope is a decreasing function, will be then translated into a falling marginal cost function, and especially this one we will later on use. Okay, then let's come to this new trade theory. We assume now increasing returns to scale, and remember this example, the production in Wolfsburg is also quite similar to the production situation by Toyota in Japan. So what we also now assume is that we have almost no differences in the productivities in our trading partners. Also, we assume still that we have constant factor prices to be still quite easy, and from this increasing returns to scale, this then means that the average cost will fall if we are producing more. This is due to our increasing returns to scale assumption. So this means we can produce the same output with less input, or the other way around, still using the same input, constant factor prices. So the same costs, with the same costs, we can now produce more output, and this then translates in falling average costs in production. So please keep this in mind. Yeah, and what kind of consequences this have then, and we can do examples. We will go later on in more detail. That, yeah, we assume also and take again this example in the automotive sector. There we said, well, we have quite similar products. A medium-sized VW is very similar to a medium-sized Toyota. Within our classical theory, trade theory, then we would say, or we would just say, well, if we have very similar goods, then we will find in the market only that good which is lower in price. But now we look in general to our preferences, and then we see that, yeah, we are quite happy if we have for, yeah, one possibility to do. So here, mobility coming from A to B. We want to use a car, but we want, and remember, nobody can say how our preferences have to look like. So in general, humans are happy if we have here for mobility not only one good, but we have more goods, so that in general we have a variety of goods. Although these goods are doing, every of these goods is doing the same. We are still in general happy that we have a choice out of different goods, doing all the same. And this then means that we have similar goods, but that every country is specializing in one variant. And one country is then producing more or less this variant for the world market. And there you see that we somehow are leaving the fully competitive market assumption, because then we are the only provider of, and here you have to be careful, of a variant of a good which is doing almost the same as the variant of this good in the other country. But then we say, okay, within a specific interval, we are somehow a monopolist. And this is then later on called monopolistic competition. Because of course, if the Toyota would be 20,000 euros more expensive compared to the similar VW, then we will not buy this car. But within a specific interval, there we are providing only our own variant. Well, and if then in every country we have this situation that within a small interval we are a monopolist, then we can create these increasing returns to scale, and that average costs will fall. And so we have the specialization in the product variant, but still, since everybody can buy at the world market, we have not only one car. Remember, the communist system in the GDR, you had only one car. There it was decided our country provides only one car. This was the Trabi. There you have this closed market. You have a monopoly, but since we have this closed market, the consumers could also only buy this only this product, so only one variant. And here we are also specialized in the different variants, but since everybody can buy at the world market, the consumers have still the choice. And if we have on the global market size such a situation, then we can say, well, in every car industry participating at the global market, we find this nice situation that we have falling average costs when we are, if we are increasing our production, and then everybody can exploit this situation of economies of scale. So this I forgot to explain economies of scale. This is derived from increasing returns to scale. Well, and then this is also an explanation why we had during the last decades and this huge this huge growth of the car manufacturing, more or less becoming the largest companies in the world. Well, right now, then, so since the beginning of the 2000s, then we had also the big tech companies now being the largest companies in the world. Okay, and in the end, we have qualitatively argued that trade also takes place between countries with comparable production and that we are producing similar goods and producing similar goods, so different variants. This is the general situation, and then one distinguishes how can we find such situations that we distinguish between internal and external economies of scale. And as I explained with the example of the car industry, there we then could argue, why do we find this situation with a falling average cost function, that this is due to the reason that our company becomes larger and larger and larger. And maybe in other lectures you have also talked about mergers and acquisitions. And remember, for example, Daimler once wanted to or has joined, what was it? I think with Mazda, and in the United States it joined not General Motors, not Ford. What is the third largest car manufacturer? in the United States? Actually, right now I do not remember. Let's see. General Motors and Chrysler. Yes, Chrysler bought it. Well, and you saw, well, then they split this because it doesn't function, this merging, and now it is together with Stellantis. This means Renault, Citroën, Peugeot, and Chrysler have joined later on. Or also you find this in the chemical sector. So compare M&A of international companies. Well, and then if we look in the pharmaceutical sector, in the chemical sector, or in the car manufacturing sector, well, then we see producing these goods, especially for the innovation, for development, new technical details, we have very high fixed cost. And if you have within your cost function a very high fixed cost block, then of course you have to invest. Think, for example, to develop a new medicine product. Sometimes you have to invest a billion of US dollars or a billion of euros, and you have to develop this over 10, 20 years, because in the end you are only allowed to go to the market when you have made many, many studies all over the world. And for this, we need then large companies for this. And in the end, then we have the situation that these large companies are producing differentiated products. And as I already said, then we are leaving the fully competitive markets. And this is then called monopolistic competition. And if we look at the so-called external economies of scale, then we have the situation that we find these external economies of scale due to the reason that we have there many, many countries producing similar goods. So here, these falling average costs are due to many small countries. Well, and where do we find this? Well, especially within an innovation process, we find a clustering of small countries. And the most famous example for this is Silicon Valley. There you find all these startups, and you find there a very innovative society. So many, many clever guys just sitting together, thinking about new products. What can we do? And so do you have there all these spillover effects. And we will later on come into more detail to this. And also not in only in international trade. You see, for example, that you have also Quite often, um, a clustering of small shops. Some of you are studying tourism, and if you go to a nice village, then you find maybe in one street 8 times more or less the same souvenir shop, all selling more or less the same goods because they are profiting from each other, although they are in a highly competitive market. So here in principle, we have then the other way around. Many but small companies. This means we have here a clustering of suppliers, souvenirs, startups, as I mentioned. And this means then there, since we have many companies, we have mostly perfect competition, but with increasing returns to scale due to this spillover and innovation process, but with increasing returns to scale due to innovation and spillover effects. And especially, question, have you talked about spillover effects in other lectures? So that you become better just looking at your competitor? No? Well, then I'm really surprised because these spillover effects, this is, yeah, in my understanding, one of the core concepts in business administration. So benchmark analysis, that you try to identify within the market the best competitor and then learning from them. Benchmark analysis you have talked about. Also no. So the word benchmark, well, I studied 30 years in history. Maybe everything has changed. Anyway. Okay, 10 minutes left. So then we are going back after all these qualitative explanations. You know me, we have to calculate a little bit. Well, so this just as a recapitulation, I've talked about this. Costs we divide into fixed cost and variable costs. Then, of course, average cost is fixed cost times, and here we assume just a linear a cost function. And this means marginal cost is just the derivative of our cost function. And if we have here linear, then in the end, we have constant marginal costs. Hopefully, if we would say this is if this would be general as C variable, let's say our cost function is K plus CF plus variable, and this with the convex curvature, then hopefully, so average costs and marginal cost You hopefully know this picture. And this is the minimum of average cost. Do you remember this? This you should have seen also in 2 or 3 other lectures. And yes, great. Okay, so this just as a recapitulation and a little bit easier since we just assume here a linear function. And this then translates that the marginal cost is constant, and this means then that the average cost is not starting increasing again, but, and this is our assumption, that we have here this decreasing average cost function. So overall decreasing average cost function. So that you remember this, and we assuming now this. This is one of the main assumptions within our model now. And at least let's start with this monopolistic competition. I have talked already about this. We are going internal economies of scale. This means few companies producing different variants of goods, and within an interval we have a quasi monopoly for this product variant, but only in a small price interval. Of course, we have not a pure monopoly. We have to look also at our competitors with the other product variants, and this means here in a small price interval. So in general, of course, we have to orient our price policy on the average price. Remember, this I said, a medium size car, maybe 40, 50,000 euros. And then within a price interval, VW can change the price. It could be a little bit more expensive than the Toyota, than the Ford with a similar size. But you cannot just try to sell your car, for example, for 80,000 euros. So in general, we will then find different and independent prices from each other, and orienting on the average of the industry. This then, so to speak, means that we take the prices of the other company as given. And this is then somehow similar to Cournot competition. Remember Cournot competition? You have made a Cournot oligopoly. This also in micro. Okay, yeah, and their quantities as given. So a similar thinking which we have here. And then I talked about this, the infrastructure, the production possibilities in Japan and in Germany are quite similar in the automotive sector, but we are producing differentiated products. And now we are coming to our evil formulas. How are we now modeling this situation? Well, we say we have the demand for this product variant of our single firm. Then, of course, our demand depends on the overall size. So this is then the automotive market in Germany and in Japan and in the United States. This is then S, the size of the sector. This will be, if we are open for the others, this will be the global market. Of course, we are depending on the number of firms. How many competitors do we have? And then this is the important part. We have our own price and large capital P, we have the average price. And then we look at this dependence here, difference, and this has to be larger than 1. This is our interval where we can deviate. So you see, if small p is larger than capital P, then x is decreasing because we are subtracting then something. But demand does not collapse. And this is important now because we have monopolistic competition. In a fully competitive market, if I want to sell for a higher price than the market equilibrium price, then total demand for me is collapsing. I'm selling nothing anymore. Yeah, and I'm running out of time. So this will be our model, and then from this we are then deriving using then monopoly theory, and here maybe especially you can then look up for tomorrow, look up monopoly profit maximization. Remember then please this, you had the demand, you had the marginal revenue, and if we have constant marginal costs, then this was your monopolistic output and this your monopoly price. So just have a look for this tomorrow because then you will easily understand what I'm doing. So thank you very much for today and see you tomorrow. Or maybe we see, do we see this afternoon?